Mukherjee, a senior security SA with AWS, as Ron said. So specifically, I am in a group that we call Global Services Security. So our group motto is to form a bridge between the AWS services and you as a customer who are leveraging the services to build up your environment, right? So what we try to do is we try to talk with as many customers, work with them, both at enterprise, startups, and smaller, medium scale businesses, understand their problem, understand how can we further help in addition to the AWS services, and bring product solutions or guidances that would help you. So in this case, today we'll talk about the AWS Security Reference Architecture, which is a guidance and a code base. I'm the primary author of the guidance. And so today we have a limited time. It's a big guidance. So what we'll try to cover is what is the SRA and why it matters to you, among many other things that are there. Share some highlights so that in your not spare time, but when you get time, you can navigate the document and the code and some of the next steps that should be helpful after you get the information today. Okay. So as I said, we try to work with our customers and try to understand the problems. And one of the common pattern we started to see is if you see this quote, there is a famous quote that too much light often blinds you people, right? So if you translate into AWS environment, as you know, AWS has around 200 plus services and 30 plus security services. Within services, there are many features, right? So as a customer, if you are exposed to this array of services, sometimes we hear customers say, okay, I get that there are those services, but I'm not getting the holistic picture. Like, where do I start? What is my target state that I aim for? Like, how do I use these services together? Like, should I focus on five sets of services or should I focus on one? Like, what is the holistic picture that I should aim for? And that's was the problem that we are trying to solve with the AWS Security Reference Architecture. So as I said, some of the challenges we saw was, again, there are 30 plus AWS security services. How do they work together? Like, how do they integrate? Because for me as a customer, it is my AWS environment. Like, I'm not using a particular service, I'm building an environment. Right? So, how all this come together? Secondly, is again, because of the nature of clouds, it's an elastic platform where developers have the freedom of building at their requirement, scaling up and down. So, how do I visualize and understand what my environment is today, right? And how do I explain that to my stakeholders? Like, as you would see in your environment, in your organization, not every stakeholder is a technical stakeholder. Like, if there was a CISO who has to go up and report to the board and say, what is the state of my security of AWS environment? I can go and give them a list of Python codes or a cloud formation or something like that to tell them what my environment is, right? So I need something easily comprehensible that I can explain and collaborate with. So as I said, those are the problems that we started to work backwards from and try to see what can we do to help customers like you solve those. So that resulted in the security reference architecture. As the name suggests, it is a security architecture, but it is meant to be reference for you. Like, we are not saying that this is the only way to build an architecture and you should copy paste in your environment. But think of, I think Ron was saying, think of it as a blueprint, as a framework that you can take, modify as per your organization requirement, as per your tech stack, and build your version of the architecture. So the SRA consists of three primary things. One, as you see on the left, is a one-page architecture diagram. Now, it's a bit small because we intentionally wanted to fit into one page so that it's easy to comprehend, right? In the middle is a design guidance. So it explains that architecture. What are the components of the architecture? What are the building blocks? Why you are using a particular service? What it is relation with other services and some best practices. And on the right of your screen, you'll see a public GitHub repo that provides sample solutions and implementation of the component of the architecture. Because at the end of the day, you have to build it out in your environment. And that's where the code repository comes handy. So, but to take a step back, what is the objective of SRA, right? Your organization, your business is not there to build security architecture. Your business is there to provide services to your customers. And you do that through business applications. So the objective of the SRA is to provide you a secure platform so that you can ship more applications, your sensitive applications, business critical applications, faster to your customer, but in a secure manner. So that's the objective of the SRA. Um, so let's look at some of the building blocks. As I said, we won't be able to go through every detail, but I'll try to leave you with an flow that you can follow along. So firstly, we took best practices from some of the known frameworks that AWS has released, like the well-architected framework, the cloud adoption framework, and the shared responsibility model, right? So if you haven't gone through those, I would encourage you to go through those they provide a foundation level of understanding of the cloud adoption. So we took that, built upon it, and the first building block we added was an account structure. Now, you may have heard, I've read that the recommendation is to have a multi-account environment. And just a background, AWS accounts are logical isolation within AWS Cloud that are by design isolated from each other, right? They are by design isolated, and you have, as a customer, have to take an action to penetrate the boundary of an account. Now, in earlier days, when AWS started, because people were putting everything into a single account. And we soon realized that as a best practices, we should adopt a multi-account environment where there are different accounts for different types, and that they should be used in together to build your architecture. So then the question comes, okay, what are the accounts that I should have? So here we provided a basic account structure that we see from experience that every type of organization requires, irrespective of what type of workload they have. Now, on the accounts, the next building block is what we call recurring and distributed guardrails. So as soon as you start having multiple accounts, the next question comes is, okay, how do I have a uniform baseline across my 10, 20, hundreds or 500 accounts? So that's where the recurring and distributed guardrail comes in. So the guidance is you have to understand what is the recurring guardrail I need across my environment, right? Irrespective of, again, what type of account it is, what type of workload it is. So some things you'll see in the green box is like organization trail. So it is CloudTrail is a service that helps you capture API logs. So who is doing what and when. Now, this is something that you want in every account type, irrespective of what type of account it is, right? So some other things like guard duty, which is a threat intelligence service. Again, you would ideally want in every account type. So identify those guardrails that you would want in every account type, and corresponding to this, what are the services that provides you with these guardrails, and how do you implement those? So those are in the guidance. And so the third thing that comes when we are talking to customers like you is, okay, I have 500 accounts, and now you are telling me that I need an organization trail in 500 accounts. How do I manage that, right? So that's where a centralized management comes in, right? most of the AWS services have a feature through which you can centrally manage that service across your distributed architecture. You don't need to log into 500 accounts to manage those. So it's a very handy feature that provides central governance across your architecture. Now, with the centralized governance, just highlighting a powerful feature, what is called delegated administrator. So if you have worked with the AWS organization, which is a service that uses to manage multiple accounts, there is a account type known as management account. So as the name suggests, it's the account that is used to manage your whole AWS organization. Now, by default, all accounts have administration capability in that management account. On the other hand, the management account is very sensitive because it has the capability to affect your whole organization. So, as per best practice, the recommendation is not to have your management capabilities all within the management account, but delegate out to some other account so that everyone is not logging into the management account and you need not give access to everyone. So that's where the delegated administrator comes in. And in the SRA, we talk about for which service, which account should be ideally the delegated administrator, and how do you configure that. Um, so next comes what we call the core architecture. So what we mean by the core architecture is we find this to be a baseline architecture that most organization would need. If you're operating your production workloads on AWS, you should have at a minimum this architecture that consists of your management account, your security OU, infrastructure OU, and workload OU. And again, the why we have those three types. The guidance also has what is called design considerations uh, that would help you customize this architecture. For one of the examples is like it's hard to see here, but you'll see that within shared services there is identity center, a service that is used to manage identities. Now, some enterprise customers have big identity teams, right? And for them, it may have the identity managed in its own account because there are tens of people who need access to it. It's a dedicated workforce that is managing, and they don't want to mix it up with other shared services. So things like that are mentioned in the design consideration that would help you customize the design as per your organization need. So after the core architecture, there is something called deep dives. So once you have established your baseline, ideally you would want to progress further and deep dive into certain aspects. Now, as of today, there are four deep dive architectures on edge security that provides different ways to architect to protect your AWS edge and using different network services that AWS provides. Second is an important identity management deep dive that talks about the various ways you can manage different identities on AWS. And when we say identities, we are talking about like workforce identities, consumer identities, mission identities. So how do you manage those? And as I said, there's no one way to do it. So this deep dive talks about different ways that you can do that. And obviously, we have to talk about Gen AI because customers like you are starting to experiment with Gen AI, starting to put Gen AI into production workloads. And to do that securely, we have provided architectural guidance how to leverage AWS Gen AI services in a well-architected way. And lastly, there is a deep dive around forensics, digital forensics. So if you have forensics requirement, how do you architect your environment so that you can collect forensic evidence, you can analyze them, and you can contain and security event till you are doing a forensics analysis. So that was what the SRA currently is. And now next is how do you use it? Right? Again, there is not one way to use it. It depends on where you are in your journey. So if an organization is starting up building their architecture on AWS, SRA is best used to define their target state. But there are majority of organizations who have already started on AWS, right? They have some or combination of workloads that are running on AWS. So if you're an organization like that, SRA helps you review and revise your existing architecture. So you can validate your existing architecture against the SRA and see where you are deviating from best practices and how can you fix those. So that's where comes the execution part, right? SRA also helps you through the code library execute and build your architecture. We have also seen SRA being used for another learning exercise, right? Again, what SRA does is brings all of the AWS specialist security services into one umbrella. So if you don't need to go out and look for, okay, what is this particular X service, what it is capability, and then go for Y service. You can come to SRA, get an overview, and then go and deep dive into the service that you want. And lastly, what it does, it helps an organization discussion, right? You have an architecture, there are many stakeholders, they try to provide brainstorming input into that architecture to build yours. So lastly, as I said, there is a public GitHub repository that has different solutions. It talks about what the solution does, what it would deploy. And then, as I said, like after you learn all this, what you should do, action and steps. Ideally, take this SRA and try to assess your organization security architecture. Learn about one or two new services that you haven't worked with. In next few months, try to identify one or two security improvement areas that SRA recommends that is missing in your organization. And as a long term, try to build a target state security architecture that you want to build towards and educate others about the SRA. So once you get the slides, you can scan the QR codes to get to the artifact, or you can simply Google AWS SRA, and hopefully that would be the first or second link. And thank you. And if you have any questions, anything, here is my email and my LinkedIn alias. Feel free to reach out and happy to help as I can.